Excellent. We shall get cracking. Yeah.
Perfect.
Should I put up with wide spectrum? Oh dear. Wide spectrum or just normal?
I don't know what the word.
I don't really know. I'll keep it on that.
Normal.
Seems to be fine. Hello online. We're just getting cracking. You haven't missed anything.
Great. Okay. Wonderful. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to look at Roger Scruton today, and we're going to look at a chapter of this very beautiful book, The Soul of the World. I don't know how many of you were able to find it online.
Read the chapter.
Yeah, perfect. It's a really great book. It's sort of looks at the human person's place in the world, the material, and the metaphysical, the spiritual side, and how they fit together. And it's very beautifully written. I'll get on that page anyway. He's how many of you know of Roger Scruton?
I never heard his name before.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
Not through Buckingham either. You
No.
wouldn't have, because he was associated with Buckingham.
Right.
Yeah. He was a fairly controversial figure because he was a very unapologetic conservative and of the most traditional and principled kind. He had a lot in common with Edmund Burke, who we looked at last week, last seminar, 2 weeks ago, and he had this extraordinary gift. He never described himself as a philosopher primarily, but a writer. And he wrote on everything, every subject. He wrote on architecture, music, politics, history, philosophy, even rock music. Nothing was off limits for him. And he also wrote novels as well. He had a remarkable gift. And he, so I'll tell you a little bit about him. He grew up in High Wycombe, with parents who were only nominally Christian. In his diaries, he talks about how he used to always be arguing with his father over politics. His father was a very liberal figure. Even from his childhood, he was inadvertently being formed in a very critical mindset and yearning after something like conservatism, although it didn't occur to him for a long time what it was. He went to Cambridge to do natural science, but then decided to go do philosophy. He ends up doing much later, he does a PhD, sort of following that all the way through, and does a study in art and imagination with Elizabeth Anscombe, who was quite a famous philosopher of the day. During his university year, he did a trip to Paris, and he was in Paris during the famous student riots of '68, and he was absolutely horrified by what he saw there. He said, I quote, "I suddenly realized I was on the other side. What I saw was an unruly mob of self-indulgent, middle-class hooligans. When I asked my friends what they wanted, what they were trying to achieve, all I got back was this ludicrous Marxist gobbledygook. I was disgusted by it, and thought there must be a way back to the defense of Western civilization against these things. That's when I became a conservative, and I wanted to conserve things rather than pull them down." He had a very, very strong feelings about what was going on in Europe, and made it his whole academic career and his whole life work to put forward a positive vision of the alternative.
It's also a pivotal moment in 20th century political philosophy, because figures on the left also criticised the 68ers for, in somewhat similar language, sort of kind of making it a bit of a nonsensical movement, a kind of like much more emotional kind of rage movement of the 68 rather than something visionary. So someone like Slavoj Žižek on the left of political philosophy also criticises the 68ers, because ultimately what it fell prey to was the integration of revolutionary spirit, as far as he's concerned, into a broader capitalism. That's when these kind of ideas became commercialised, and actually they didn't really mean anything. So as Scruton's saying, they didn't really mean anything. It was all a bit sort of silly, and left-wing philosophers were also doing, sort of making the same argument.
It's true. It's very interesting to know that. I mean, Herbert Marcuse was one of the intellectual precursors of what became a student, right? But Herbert Marcuse wrote in the 40s, and then his books were sort of rediscovered 20 years later, and these students sort of claimed they were trying to implement some of the ideas there, but Herbert Marcuse disowned all of them. you haven't understood what I read, what I wrote. In part because there was nothing practical about what was going on. And indeed, you say the sort of that unbridled revolutionary spirit is easily brought under the auspices of market capitalism.
That's when it became commercialised and kind of much more of a kind of like hip movement to be a part of, rather than actually meaning anything fundamentally.
Isn't it like a general thing nowadays with protests that there's very much a sort of emotional outage more than actually trying to change things just to show your emotions.
And as
literally kind of a feeling of despair.
And Scruton's somewhat saying that, saying, it's confused. It doesn't really have a essence of what it is.
Actually, Georges Brassens was a singer-songwriter, but his texts are very poetic. Even they read them in schools. He wrote a song, Mourir pour une chose, die for a cause. The trouble is only, I don't know for which cause I should die.
Yes, so it's kind of like choose one, pick at random sort of thing.
Exactly.
Removes the meaning.
I think a lot of people find themselves in that place. Definitely.
But then in Germany it was completely different because there was really something solid there because all the Nazis came back to their previous position.
Exactly.
People were very frustrated with that.
The Baden-Meinhof gang
just became
and all the sort of
incubated
left-wing
in
rebellious elements as
well.
They just in the 60s.
Sort of. They found their way back into government offices and were kept quiet. There was a certain wisdom that emerged in Germany to do with if you have wealth, you really just keep quiet about it because the wealth probably came from and there's a lot of people in that position.
Professors at university were reinstalled. Speer, the architect of Hitler, just a bit in prison, and that's it.
And then as reaction, you have left-wing terrorist groups like the Baden-Meinhof gang who start trying to take out figures who, as you're explaining, are reinstated into these positions after that period of time.
So, in 1982, Scruton became the chief editor of the Salisbury Review. It's not so well known. You can find in really old bookstores some collections of the articles that were published there. I'm very fortunate to have come across one of one of 3 volumes that were collected together of essays on conservatism, and it's a really great volume. And it was publicly opposed to Thatcherism, which is also very interesting. So similar to what we've just said about the relationship between sort of the new left and traditional leftist thinkers, Thatcherism is in an analogous relationship to traditional conservatism. It's completely devoid of traditional conservative principles. It's got nothing of the intellectual substance to do with like an anthropology. Who is man? What is his place in the world? What is his relationship to the state? Thatcher's politics is purely economic. It's revolutionary. It's
arguably in many ways very much the antithesis of small-c conservatism.
I think so, and because Thatcher has now framed what the Conservative Party identified itself with, and it's fundamentally libertarian. It's not conservative. They have very different views of freedom, as we'll see actually on the next slide, I think, or the slide after, what the conservative view of freedom is. The distinction will be clear. He became quite known for being this very ruthless critic of the thinkers of his day. He wrote Thinkers of the New Left, published that in 1985. It was a series of essays on sort of writing against E.P. Thomson and Ronald Dworkin, who were well-known English historians. Galbraith, the American economist, Sartre, Foucault, Althusser. There was a republish of it in 2016 where he did
Fools, Firebrand.
Fools, Frauds, and Firebrand. The thinkers of the New Left, where he exchanged it for a lot of new essays on people like Lacan, Zizek, updated some of his thoughts on Sartre and Foucault. And it wasn't all negative. Actually, it's interesting to read the chapters on Sartre and Foucault in the 2016 edition, because his criticism is softer. It is a bit softer because he recognises that towards the end of both thinkers' lives, they began to think a bit more what Scruton would characterise as a more authentic way.
And practically.
Yeah.
We saw this with when we were doing our one on Camus, for example, in the later works like that, Bread and Freedom. A greater analytical approach to how you might structure a society in smaller texts rather than the grand philosophical works that most people read. But Derek, a colleague of ours from St Andrews, got me a copy of that. As I idolised these French New Left figures, I got a copy as a jibe to say, read this, false diagrams and frauds. So I proudly have a copy of Scruton sitting on my shelf.
Yeah. Because you're only Scruton.
Yeah, it is.
Very funny. One of my favourite things about Scruton is that he went around this time. He went to Czechoslovakia, and he founded an underground university during the Soviet occupation of Czechoslovakia. And he smuggled in books from the West, and he hosted lectures with a friend of his. And he also, while he was there, got to know Václav Havel very well, and he became the president post fall of the Soviet Union. And so Scruton is very deeply revered still in the East. You go to Hungary, Budapest, you find cafes for Scruton. He got medals from these governments. He was the teacher. Yeah.
Well, I've been to Budapest a few times. I did say to Jack that I would go.
Should this young man?
I think he has about 3. They tell me if I'm
Yeah, there's three, and one is a restaurant and 2 are cafes. I've been to one of the cafes.
Yeah.
He was also the teacher of Viktor Orban. Yeah.
Oh, really?
But
It's an interesting.
I know a little bit about this because the teachers on my course at Buckingham were friends of Scruton and took over the teaching of the course after he died, and they say that the relationship was a bit difficult because Scruton was very worried about Viktor Orban going much more towards the extreme of the conservative dimension, and I tried to counsel him on certain things. So they maintained a friendship, but Scruton intellectually was critical. But if Scruton was ever in Budapest, Orban would drop him everything. Hey, come over to the park. So it's really interesting.
And that's quite surprising for Viktor Orban to do something like that, because he, again, I think if you're an enemy of his, I could disagree with him. He'd cut you off. Well, that's my.
Yeah, but I mean the difference was quite probably. My impression of Scruton is someone who tries to express his disagreements fairly charitably, especially with friends. I mean, very Aristotelian almost, trying to will the good in his friend, but doesn't necessarily manifest very much as he would like. Okay, so in terms of his intellectual heritage, Scruton got a lot from Kant, Immanuel Kant. Oh yeah, of course.
Did Scruton write about wine? I'd imagine.
Yes, he did. Yeah, and no, seriously, and it's a really funny book because it's titled "I Drink, Therefore I Am."
I have heard of this.
So he literally wrote on everything. So he was greatly influenced by Immanuel Kant, who was very famous for what's called the turn to the subject, where philosophy became less about how we, how objects sort of are the standards, their own standard by which we know them. We sort of, in scholastic or Aristotelian philosophy, we sort of take the forms from the object. So the object, in many ways, is the measure of the mind, what the mind knows. For Kant, it was the reverse, that philosophy is about discovering human ways of knowing and measuring the world against that. So Kant made a very famous distinction between things as they are in themselves and things as they appear to us, and said we couldn't know what things were in themselves, only how they appeared to us. And that means you can, so you look at something like this and you think, well, it has a kind of a scientific order, a rational order, but then also has a moral order. In terms, I use it, to drink and to be social, and it has an aesthetic order as well, because it's got a shape. And so these were distinct faculties that Kant tried to analyze, Scruton follows Kant in a lot of this. He describes the world of human experience as basically moral. He tries to understand the relationship between human experience and the brain, and says that he tries to show that they're very much related, but that what the human person is not reducible to matter. And this is a very dominant topic in his writings, criticizing science as too reductive, as trying to reduce the human person to chemicals, and his problem was that this doesn't tell us anything about how we actually experience the world. If you tell me where love is in the brain, that doesn't tell me anything about my experience of love at all. That was his contention. I think it's very persuasive. He also took a lot from the school of the personalists, who had their heritage from Kant. These were people like Martin Buber and Emmanuel Levinas, who wrote a lot about the I and the thou. We've had some conversation about this recently, Maistre. Scruton very interested in this I-thou dynamic, that I am a subject, I address you as a subject, and this is sort of a common basis for us to share a we, a community, and that's implicit in our language and in our ethics.
Quaker, isn't it? Quakers only use thou and thee in their greetings to one another as well, but historically.
But it's not so much about the language as in like the word. It could be you. It could be any word.
Oh right. Okay,
but it's the fact that
creating that relationship.
It's the fact that what I am fundamentally is a moral subject.
Yeah, is relational or
who is accountable to others.
Yeah.
Precisely because I address another who addresses me as another. And that's it. That's the basic level of our language and of our experience.
Well, that's quite post-structural, relating it to the absent figure of this seminar, Foucault. That this is very much like relational concepts like that in terms of like the definition of the self defined by the relationship.
It comes from Hegel.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, it begins in Kant, because for Kant, this inner world of this moral life of the subject.
And phenomenal.
Well, I don't want to introduce too many terms because one easily gets swamped in Kant. But this inner world of the subject, which Kant also gets from Rousseau, is primary, and it's sort of the origin point for all our ways of knowing the world. So Kant does envisage, so he distinguishes the sort of the scientific knowledge from the moral knowledge, the practical knowledge, from the aesthetic knowledge. He envisages that they do have a root in the subject. But whether he was successful is a long conversation.
Scruton used the word face a lot.
The face?
Yeah, the face.
Yes.
Especially when he goes into architecture.
Yes.
The same relation comes back, sort of seeing really the face of someone.
Mm-hmm.
And that expresses the soul behind it, or the spirit. Because he starts with Hegel's whole theory about the mythic origins and the sort of scientific origins. He makes this sort of distinction, in which he gives to the mythic origins this theory of Hegel, which it's almost a new story. It's like one story, and then the actual story of humanity just works differently.
Mm-hmm.
And the face is then.
Do you remember what the other story was?
The other story is the realization of so it's with an acorn and a tree, and then the freedom of the human subject becomes the state, and the state is sort of the tree of the seed of human freedom.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And yes, and for that there's a sort of natural beauty that needs to envelop in the state, and order, morality.
Why do you think the state is the end result of the person? Why is it the tree?
Well, he starts with talking about Hegel himself, about property, and then about the household economia,
Mm-hmm.
and then from there on the state between the love of neighbors as well, which Scruton also goes into.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it has to do with gaining autonomy over sort of your own life and the way how to sort of organize things around you and, well, create in a way. Become
Right.
creative human beings.
Okay.
So that's also sort of change from the sort of naturalistic hunting and gathering for survival, but growing into something transcendent in a way.
Mm-hmm. In terms of how freedom would be characterized in that final development, is it an ordered freedom or a disordered freedom?
I think it's an open question.
Okay.
Whether it's disordered or ordered, then.
My reading, and so we can turn. But you told us most of what's on the slide, which is really
what
great.
he says is that Hegel says that it is sort of unopen in a way, that it always becomes sort of the tree, just like every seed, right?
Mm-hmm. He says.
But I don't know if Scruton agreed with that particularly.
I thought he did. We can investigate this as we go. He says personhood is the telos, the end of each of us. That Hegel said that personhood strives to be realized in the state, in institutions. So, in other words, freedom is ordered towards and constituted by forms of government that bind us together in laws and in states and communities and so forth that are recognized, that are binding. Only there does freedom become concrete rather than being abstract and unconditional. And abstract, unconditional freedom is connected to the impulse to destroy the intruder, to cast out the critic, to submit to the powerful leader, to kill, enslave, violate the captive. Which he says disrupt the work of civilization and must be channeled in other directions or even suppressed entirely if we are to flourish as persons flourish in a condition of reciprocal accountability.
So this is the inverted Camus Sartre
Yes.
de Beauvoir in the sense of freedom is rebelling against, rather than this, which is freedom is the actual operation of the state and its laws functioning well.
Yeah. A very crude way of putting it is that the state gives you freedom.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not metaphysically true.
So you have rather than a negative.
It gives freedom a use.
Yeah.
A context in which it's effective. Apart from the state, we are intruders and critics and enslavers and murderers and all these terrible things he lists there.
It's interesting if you look at Rousseau. He would say when you put a stick in the ground, you say this is mine. That is where all
society is corrupted from.
Yeah.
And indeed, Hegel and Scruton as well says like that's the start of freedom.
Well, what Scruton had a slightly different perspective than Rousseau on what actually it means to put the stick down. Scruton doesn't see it as a one-way thing. He says the last line here. It has to do with us being brought into a condition of reciprocal accountability. So the state isn't just about elevating one man over others, but it's actually about rights and duties which go up and down in the hierarchy and also horizontally between the institutions. So much like how Edmund Burke in the previous seminar was talking about how the rulers are in such a position that they this sense of their duty, of the duty of their office, must impress them to the extent that they ought to see themselves as servants, in effect. And so there's supposed to be this reciprocity in governance. And if you don't have that, you have tyranny, and that's no better than sort of the former state, where tyranny is liable to emerge anyway, but it's just a much more fluid and chaotic tyranny where someone becomes powerful for a few years and then the tribe is disbanded or something because the resources are scarce or some bigger tribe comes along. Tyranny isn't sustainable, and it's not the telos of personhood because it doesn't recognize persons in a tyranny. You're just a use. You're a means to an end. You're not an end in yourself. So personhood is this quality which elevates us beyond all conceivable utilitarian abuses and being taken advantage of and so forth. We're elevated where the other has to address me in a manner of respect and common humanity, and we are accountable to one another. So this is the kind of vision of the state which Scruton.
It's quite contractarian rather than contractualist in that sense, that the reciprocal accountability is coming from the state. Oh, I can. Oh, you did. Coming from the state and its institutions, because it could come across at first when you hear something like that with the reciprocal accountability, could come across as quite Lockean in a way, that coming out of a sort of barbaric, potential, tyrannical state of nature, you need to have, but for Locke, rights to establish those against the potential barbarity, savagery. But it's interesting that he grounds those much more not in rights, not in sort of, I suppose for him maybe that would still be a bit abstract, and he grounds it in very solid foundations of institutions that have been established over time somewhat in building up to this telos, as you're saying, rather than what Locke would say in a similar vein. I think that last line sounded quite Lockean in a way, but Locke would ground it in rights rather than institutions.
Yeah, indeed. And I think another, I guess, related characteristic of this difference between Locke and true conservatism would be that I think for Locke freedom is negative, or the role of the institution in relation to freedom is negative. So the government is there to tell you where your freedom ends. For a conservative like Roger Scruton, the government is actually there to give you also a positive dimension for how you use your freedom. You use your freedom through these channels, because these are what are sort of bring you into the fullness of your humanity to operate within a juridical framework or a democratic framework. These are fundamentally human things for Scruton. Or even on the smaller scale level, to operate in a town hall. Where we drop all the reasons which would lead us to treat one another as slaves or or as things to be used, and we abandon that for something else, something higher. Okay, so Monsieur also mentioned this idea of a civilizational miss, and so Scruton is interested in this chapter about really, I guess, where this idea of the person comes from, and how societies maybe emerge to reflect this. Indeed, where do the kind of civilizations where personhood is protected come from? How do they emerge? And he begins with the simple observation that when people are settled in a place, they experience a dominant metaphysical need, the need for authoritative proof that this place is ours, that we are entitled to it and can call upon the law of the universe to protect our right to it. And then he connects it to what he sees primarily the religious foundation, one in which people assemble to protect their household, their ancestors, and their gods, and in which each family gained an enduring foothold. Religion and family go together as a single and eternal imperative, and from their union is born the household, the regime of property, and the sacred sphere of domestic life. So two things there. This dominant metaphysical need to say this place is ours, that we belong here, and then it's then connected to a religious impulse, which then becomes concrete in, first of all, the household, and then property, and then goes out from there. I wonder why he chooses the language of the metaphysical need and then the religious need. Why not a legal? Why isn't it enough to say, well, I have a legal or sociological sort of need for, why is it more than that? Perhaps. Or why wouldn't a state on its own maybe be enough to guarantee that?
Maybe they experience their own finite being, but they long for, so what they say, the need for an authoritative proof that this place is ours, and therefore something metaphysical, something eternal, maybe.
Okay.
It makes it also sort of be protected, give this feeling of a home that never sort of goes away, giving the way for generations to come to live there.
Right.
It's like a sense of belonging. So if you legally own somewhere, you might still not feel like you belong. I could be reading it wrong.
No, indeed, I think that's right. But the mystery is, what is this need for belonging? What is belonging? Why do we want to belong?
My religious professor at my university in Utrecht, who wrote almost all his papers on this topic of belonging.
Yeah, right.
The belonging in itself is a very personal thing, isn't it? Like you can feel as though you belong in a room or in a place or in a job, whatever it may be. But whatever your personal feelings, it can be completely different from what somebody else may interpret that, is my opinion. So whether you have belonging is inherently down to the individual and not anything else, the way that I would interpret it.
Well, there's also this I and thou thing again. That this is given to you as well, which we see here. It's authoritative proof that this place is ours, given by it is relative towards the other, therefore sort of settling in that place.
Do you think that you think being able to say this place it belongs to me is a precondition to be able to address you in a way? Do I need to somehow have a stake in the world in order to address you as a subject? Is that a precondition for subjectivity, or for the I-thou relationship? If I have nothing that belongs to me, can I address you as a moral subject? Am I anything if I have nothing that belongs to me, or a place to which I belong?
I wouldn't say so, no. But in the same way, I feel like relation becomes the most fruitful in a way when you really depend on the other, and the other depends on you as well.
Yes.
That would be the sort of ultimate relation. And then that would be a sort of self-emptying, which wouldn't particularly say that you have, but of course in the first place you would need to have something yourself to be able to give. But
right. And what would you need then? You would need, if you need to have something to give, you need something that's yours.
Yeah.
A place and then property. But
I wouldn't read that as I need a place that belongs to me. I would read it as I need a place I belong to.
Okay. Right. Yeah. And you think that then lends itself more to the kind of reciprocity of the I-thou that Mature is more interested in? And that Scruton is also interested in?
This sort of place you belong to has this more infinite value than you as a finite being to.
Lost.
I think there's a certain nostalgia, a certain connection, a certain trajectory that you see talked about from ancients through to what Scruton's talking about. I mean, someone like Confucius talks about the need for ornament, the need for these things that connect us to the past, something that might not be a rational kind of build-up of why someone would want to live somewhere, but creates a certain sense of nostalgia of heritage, as the series is titled. when he's talking about a metaphysical need, something that transcends practical reasons for living in a place as well. I think that's very much an element of this belonging, that a sort of perennial reason to be placed here. That is the metaphysical connection, this sort of feeling that there has always been a link back into the past. And Confucius would call that the ornaments that pass through history. And I think sort of irrational elements maybe, but that is that kind of metaphysical side of it.
Okay, good. Let me read something from the middle of the chapter where he's actually written this in another book, an imaginary, almost like letter of someone from ancient Greece in colophon, describing the difference between the architecture in colophon and the architecture in a modern city. It's really quite interesting. I think this will connect to some of the things we've all said here. She writes, but I have not identified the real difference between ancient and modern colophon, or the real way in which we shape and are shaped by our buildings. These things cannot be understood, it seems to me, in secular terms. Our architecture derives from the temple, for the reason that the city derives from its god. The stone of the temple is the earthly translation of the god's immortality, which is in turn the symbol of a community and its will to live. The temple, like the liturgy, is forever, and the community contains not the living only, but also the dead and the unborn. And the dead are protected by the temple, which immortalizes them in stone. So the basis is the community's desire to express itself and to endure through time. I think it's important then what you say, Stephanie, about it's a place where I belong. It maybe also is also a place we can belong. It's hard to make that transition from the place that belongs to me. Maybe that's more libertarian. Maybe this is the difference that we mentioned earlier. And maybe, maybe the desire for belong is something we experience together, and then that is how the eye is out. But then it still has this dimension of the household and then the property and so forth. We there's something that is ours collectively, which we share, and then from this, new distinctions emerge between what is the property of this household or this individual and so forth. And then from the community we just read comes the first concretization of that in the temple. We read also in the second paragraph of this slide that this sense of belonging has a religious dimension to it. Scruton said the ancient city has a religious foundation primarily, one in which people assemble to protect their household. Thank you, Simon. He elaborates on this to try and help us understand why it might be a religious impulse and what that might mean. It is natural to believe that places are made sacred by the temple that is built on them, and by the act of consecration that initiates the building, such as is implied in the Greek and Roman myths. In the Old Testament, however, it is the other way around. Patriarchs erect altars, make sacrifices, bestow names on places rendered holy by some encounter with God and his angels. And this feeling was bound up with two others, their conviction that God was a real presence among them, and their sense of the land as a gift, not a gift to the present generation to use it at will, but a gift to a people in its entirety and for all time, a resource to be renewed and passed on. Sacred places are protected from spoliation, they are steeped in the hopes and sufferings of those who have fought for them, and they belong to others who are yet to be. What is the religious dimension here, exactly? What does it boil down to?
I mean, this might be a guess, but I think that it does touch on points on the future generations in respect to the past. And I think the religious kind of dimension plays into that certain places are created in a way where we want future generations to use them, and also places that have been around. Again, our ancestors have used them. I don't know that could be wrong, but I'm still not sure if there's any other kind of religious dimension there.
Well, I think you're right. It has to do with this passing of generation to generation, and they then presumably are handing on something which they have themselves received. I think the fundamental dimension is this idea of gift. We've received something inexplicable. We've concretized it. We can make a house, we can build something, but it's more than that.
The conviction that God was a real presence among them, and their sense of the land is a gift, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because they erect altars, make sacrifices as well. The gods, they feel rendered holy by some encounter with God and His angels, and they feel inherently obedient in a way. Well, maybe they're not obedient, but dependent on a God. Because the whole stories of the Bible, of course, for example, is a fall and sort of coming back to God. So then to make this beautiful palace and have Him dwell in your city is this victory out of a loss which still lingers in the memory of the people. And so hope to have their God in their presence for the generations to come. And well, of course, to live good and happy.
You mentioned the fall. I think that's quite important also in the biblical context, which you're commenting on here.
Also, yeah.
Could I just quickly add to that?
Yeah.
I think it's also very transactional in the sense that it's an investment of passion, of emotion into these things, whether it be the temple, quite literally, or just a religious further investment into these things. What are the things around London that make one feel nostalgic or connected? It could be seeing a Nelson's column, and him saying, "By God, I've done my duty to protect this sacred land at the Battle of Trafalgar." But that is an investment of emotion, of passion, something again, irrational. It transcends our practical understanding of what a state is, but it's an investment that was put in, and thereby when we see it, when we interact with it, we get something out of it that connects us to that place, to that period, but a period of history long before us that's passed through to us that we're taking something away from as well.
I think the term as like a gift, it's given to us as a gift, is kind of reminds me through documentaries or something where they kind of interview, I don't know, these aristocrats who have a big house or a great place, and they refer to themselves as a custodian, to give it to their future generations. They live there, it is theirs, but they have to preserve it for others, and they don't almost see that place, I guess, on a different level with I don't know, Nelson's column, that's owned by essentially, I guess, all of us. We're a custodian. We don't own it ourselves. These kind of aristocrats, they don't see themselves owning it. A castle, stately home. They see themselves as custodians,
responsible for stewards.
Essentially.
Yeah.
To pass it on.
Yeah.
And it's more of a gift that they have the ability to be able to live there, or the responsibility to live in such a nice place, and then to pass it on to others, rather than to change the fundamentals.
That's very good.
I don't know if you're referring more to if sacred spaces refers more to like property, or can it refer to other things as well, or are you using it more to refer to other things, like spaces in general?
Well, he's going to say that sort of out of this sacred space, the temple and the garden, that everything becomes sort of sacred, that's going to be built around it, right? Even the houses in the streets will sort of reflect that order and the openness between the columns as well. So it's interesting, like, what is then sacred?
Yes.
So is it pretty important for human dignity to have buildings that have this dignity, the sense of sacred?
Yes.
And yeah, maybe he's coming on to this.
Yes, he is. He is.
To what extent it's harmful to human dignity or our perception of it if buildings are merely functional. And if our home has a soul to it.
He's also going to talk about sort of the banners that are put in front of buildings.
The billboards.
advertisements, for example.
Oh yeah.
Like you go, I mean, I have a picture of this much later on, but you go to Piccadilly Circus, one of the most beautiful buildings. It's our Times Square now. But they're so beautiful behind the screen we put there.
Bastardized by, but also a mosque as well in another faith. A mosque would be built on the highest point.
Yes.
And everything would be structured around on the basis of the sacred.
Yes, exactly.
The around the church as well.
So let me try and just draw a few threads together. That's all very good. We've talked about gift. We extend ourselves through what we give on to the next generation. That's often what we have ourselves received, and that process of giving and receiving maybe has an inexplicable origin back in time. How long have we been doing this? How long have we been building up an inheritance for the future? It already has the character of the sacred because precisely what you say, Jonathan. It has. You can't say it belongs to this person, but it belongs to us. And I think the question is, what did it? Is there a more? Can we understand why Scruton might call this a religious idea, let's say, or connect it to civilizational myths, or to use the language of religion to cite the Bible here, indeed, in a way that's more concrete than just sort of the humanist sense that we give on. And that's why I was interested in you mentioned the fall briefly, because this is precisely where Scruton goes to, and I think maybe this will clarify maybe why Scruton's language is actually quite important. It isn't just poetic. I think that's worth exploring. He says, referring to Exodus, that story is also a myth of origin. This myth does not tell of our expulsion from paradise and our separation from God. Rather, it tells of our rescue from wandering and conflict by the collective decision to dwell, so as once again to be united, though in another way, with the God who has expelled us from our former dwelling place. The story begins with a temple, and that temple must be fit for the God who inhabits it. It must be a permanent home, expressing an eternal presence in the city. Hence, founding temple should be stone. It should contain a sanctuary in which the God can both be concealed from his worship and revealed to his priests. But it must also be a public place. The temple symbolizes the collective intention to dwell in this place where the community has made a renewed bid for permanence. Hence, it should be permeable to the city, perhaps surrounded by an open space, and with colonnades, aisles, cloisters, precincts, in which citizens can freely associate in the benign presence of the God who watches over them. Okay, let's stop there. This myth, at the very beginning, this myth does not tell of our expulsion from paradise and our separation from God. Rather, it tells of our rescue from wandering and conflict by the collective decision to dwell. What does this mean? Thinking also of Scruton's concept of personhood, which we discussed, how freedom comes about, and maybe what
is this
we're saved
does
from.
he make like a referral to the sort of scientific origin, sort of wandering in conflict by the collective decision to dwell, like us dwelling with human beings? Does he make that sort of reference?
Do you mean is there a transition from a primitive way of living to a?
Yeah, well, in general, I find it difficult for him, to sort of place how he looks at the fall, because he looks at it as a myth, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time it becomes very real because
Well,
we
yes.
do sort of
Yes.
structure our society around this myth.
Exactly.
But in a way, it also does make this sort of change in history because we are like sort of nomads, and then we sort of slowly start to live in a structured society more.
Exactly.
Instead of hunters and gatherers.
I think this goes back to the opening where we read about freedom being concretized in the collective decision to dwell. Now personhood emerges for the first time, and we're no longer wanderers, vagrants, intruders, violent people. For Scruton, the fall is characterized by an atomism. So we're scattered, and we don't belong anywhere, and we're violent towards one another. And this is characterized as our separation from God. And the biblical story, the Exodus narrative, is the story of the collective decision to dwell. So as once again to be united, though in another way, with the God who had expelled us from our former dwelling place, to build a temple, a tabernacle, have him dwell in a paradoxical presence and absence in the tabernacle, as a reminder of this decision. Of course, the Exodus story, they're actually called out of slavery as well. But they're called into the wilderness in order to found this temple.
So it seems there's at least partially a human yearning to wander and to move through the desert. And I wonder if those in that state almost lose sight of the deeper yearning, which is to dwell, which is to be at home. And they're not able to realise that deeper yearning until they actually are at home. So some people have this as a conversion experience, that they thought that they didn't want to have this conversion experience, but then they talk of it as though they've arrived home once they've had that experience. It's almost like they needed to go through that wandering and that experience of grappling or something, of not being at home.
The anxiety to settle as well.
Yeah, but then it takes a community, it seems. It is that collective decision to dwell. So maybe it's hard just to dwell on your own. So you're waiting for the community, it seems, to make that decision.
Yeah. And I think part of the apprehension is because a collective decision to dwell enjoins responsibility, that your freedom becomes part of something greater. And you yourself become part of something greater, but not without sacrifice. But then that brings you into the fullness of who you are. And it's characterized here really as redemption. Which is Scruton's interesting take. Okay, sorry, we're back. We were just discussing.
We're just going to continue a little bit longer.
Logistics, and we're going to continue maybe for another 15 minutes, 20 minutes or so. Okay. Great. How then does the temple, in its architecture, express these things we've just been discussing? From the text that we have here. We read the temples symbolize this from about the fourth line, about the middle. The temple symbolizes the collection intention to dwell in this place where the community has made a renewed bid for permanence. And it's also before that, actually, it's given some description as well. How did the temple communicate this collective intention to dwell?
So they invite God, which I think it's a beautiful thing, because, well, to invite another being to stay with you.
Want some more water?
Well, thanks.
It's that which rescues you. And then make a sacred space for him, make it beautiful, but also enclosed, such that only with reference.
I'll get you some more water. It's only a little bit, sure? Sorry.
So if God is especially this, well, he who represents this shift towards freedom in the sense of settlement, in the sense of belonging, if he is that who makes it sort of able, who enables that for civilization, who is this representation of community in a way, but of the sacred, of we have found our home, and you invite it and you create a space in which it's well enclosed, such that if we want to go there, we really need to be sure that we actually told ourselves, like, yes, I want to be here, I want to settle here. I do off with my sort of old nomad way of living, and I make myself pure, and then I can go. And those are the priests, right?
I think in connection with that point, I think there's a paradox in that I noted from somewhere else in the chapter, the architecture of the temple must point away from this world.
Yes.
And that struck me that in order to somehow feel fully at home in a building, that building needs to point away from the world as well as being open to people to come from the world. And if we had a building that was only worldly pointing, we can never feel fully at home there because the soul yearns for something more. And yet, he talks about this, it's not simply stone, but a witnessing stone. It needs to point beyond in order for us to belong.
Yeah, the second paragraph on
right.
Exactly, very good. The temple is not fully part of the city. Metaphysically speaking, it's a place on the city's edge, a place filled by the god. And architecture must show this. It must point away from this world as well as being open to the world's transaction. It's not simply a stone that surrounds us, but a witnessing stone brought alive by carving, moulding, light and shade, for us to stand beside us in an observing posture. A thing about in the excerpt from the colophon narrative, which I haven't put on here, this fictitious writer describes the temple's columns as pillars of light, because the carving into it creates shadow and accentuates the stone in this way against the shadow, and she called it a pillar of light. I thought that was brilliant.
Nice.
The subtle detail that you find in architecture that communicate precisely this this idea that this is a place which, in order to signify what dwelling means, which is a metaphysical need, perhaps a religious need in a more serious sense, and looking beyond the present, looking intergenerationally forward and backward, it's got to have this this paradoxical element about it, where it stands for something beyond itself.
You even put pillars at the emblem of your the reading club itself.
Yes.
History of Ideas.
Yes.
That was bright lights bursting inside of it.
We have some.
I suppose this is why humanism that's purely materialistic ends up not even being humanism, from my understanding. In that, if human beings need something transcendent and you're giving them just a materialistic existence, then you end up not even valuing the human, and the whole humanist project falls apart.
Indeed. It goes back to
it is.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's really quite brilliant. This is the I think this is in Sofia,
This is in
Bulgaria.
Bulgaria, Sofia. Yeah, that's the Russian Orthodox temple, cathedral, and that's obviously the Pantheon and the Acropolis in Athens. On the edge, the way space is used and everything is around it, and it's distinct. It's clearly distinct in every respect, in the architecture, in the location, the space given to it, the posture, the crowning, the use of this. Yeah.
Wow.
Going into this paradox a bit deeper, we have St. Paul. Where am I? Yes. The source of this feeling, this idea that the temple is on the edge of the city, but also open to it, this paradox, and then by extension also the paradoxical presence and absence of the god in all these different cultures in a tabernacle. The source of this feeling in the human psyche is touched on by St. Paul in the first letter to the Corinthians. Do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? The human body is the place where the other is both present and hidden, protected from me, but nevertheless revealed, when the right words are uttered and the right gestures made. There is but one temple in the world, wrote Novalis, and that is the body of man. We touch heaven when we lay our hand on a human body. In everyday life, we don't see things in quite that way, but in the intimacy of love, anger, or desire, I encounter the other as haunted by himself. I look into him, and he becomes the presence that I sense, but which flees from my attempts to come face with me. It is on this experience that we draw. In your body. So now that everything we've been saying about the paradox the temple tried to capture is brought into our own experience of ourselves and of the other. An experience that I don't share with animals. I don't find the Zhao in the animal, but I find the Zhao in you.
Well, it's especially beautiful because we don't always sense sort of the divine thing in a human being, but sometimes we do. And so it's in a way hidden. Just like in the temple, there's this hidden place where God dwells. But on the outside, there's these pillars, right? And the light just can shine through it, as it were. But in a way, it comes from somewhere else, but it dwells in you. And we still get to sense the expressions when it comes out. So, yes, you see the similarities so beautiful in between the temple and the human body. Not really in the sort of very direct sense. Like, it's not like I see a temple right now. But if you see it as that the expression, the face, right? That expresses that which inhabits you there, which is so enclosed. The human body does actually become a temple. Yeah.
Splendid.
The rest of the chapter.
We here? Or the next one?
I think we're there.
Addressing the world.
Oh no.
Here we are.
Addressing the world. Great. Yes. We'll now see Scruton try and connect this insight into the human person back into architecture. The chapter basically is this back and forth between the world and us. Before a sacred place or artifact, I stand back in a posture of respect. This bit of the world, I believe, is inviolable. Just as the subject appears in the human faith and lays before the assassin and the abuser the absolute no.
So does an observing, questioning, interrogating eye appear in the sacred place and command us to respect it. The experience of the sacred is interpersonal. Only creatures with eye sorts can see the world in this way, and their doing so depends upon a kind of interpersonal readiness, a willingness to find meaning and reasons, even in things that have no eyes to look at them and no mouth to speak. How is it that a building acquires this I-ness? What does he mean here?
Well, primarily just the sort of human rights, I'd say. Like how we see the human being as sacred.
Mm-hmm. But it seems to be the recognition of something.
So it's a human person, perhaps inspired by God, has designed it and implemented it. And in a beautiful building, in a traditional sense, there's that imprint, I suppose, of the human mind, a bit like a human being has an imprint of our creator. In contrast to a functional building, whereby there's just how can we do this for the cheapest possible way, and there's not a clear sense of design on it. So yeah, here we go. This has got the a clear imprint of its human author. And maybe of a community as well.
Yeah.
Deeply cares about this as something. Does he talk about how it announces its existence as an end in itself?
Yes.
This is good in itself, and then functionality follows.
Exactly. So I mean, both of these are functional. We have a doorway, we have a balcony and a terrace. But the doorway is just full of grace and full of these sort of these additional signals of what this is. I presume this is a side entrance to a chapel or a church or something. Or maybe it probably is a main entrance to a church. It's just because you can't see how big it is. Because I think if I look in, it's hard to tell. It may just be Baroque. Actually, it is Baroque architecture. Anyway, on the left, on the right, this is a bit more modern. You know, no one has to design a building in this way, but in these additional ways, we see that these places are inhabited by subjects, by people with eye sorts, as Scruton says. Because the buildings themselves are more than brick, more than concrete, more than dust, more than plaster. These elements are united in a way that communicates this subjective significance. These are places we really want to dwell in. These are communal spaces. These are places of beauty, which signal.
And when he says there and then functionality follows, I suppose one angle on that is if it's clearly something that is to be cared for, people will care for it and look after it, and then it'll probably the door will carry on being well oiled, as it were, because people care about it.
I just thought I'd give a little visual for the people online. Oh, I'm going to have to do it again now.
And I think this is the King's Island. I don't know the name of it. The King's Island in Stockholm. The same. So you go down the road from where the King's Castle is a palace, and you have this wonderful. It's the old town basically. So beautiful. Again, the collective desire to dwell in all the richness of what that means. Because you read his very beautiful descriptions of architecture in the book, and then you look at places like this. It's illuminating.
Okay. There we are.
We mentioned a little bit earlier about desecration of the public space. A public space is not an unowned space, but one in which the many spheres of ownership come to a negotiated boundary. That boundary may be a street, a sequence of facades, the skyline. It represents a side-by-side settlement of private owners and the way of life that they share.
Hence, when the boundary is punctured or stolen by some private interest, we react to this as a desecration. Especially true in cities whose chroniclers record continuous dialogue over centuries between neighbours, those who build nearby in the Anglo-Saxon term. The culture of consumption sweeps across them like a tornado, scattering in its wake the doll-like images of advertising models which wash up across the building and hide their face from view. You see, you've got these are these great examples. This is in Budapest, and this is in particularly Circus, where we have these such beautiful buildings. I can't tell you, I'm absolutely in love with the buildings on Piccadilly and Regent Street. They're really nice. You can so easily walk past them. We have these huge billboards that we just put indiscriminately in front of them, defacing the buildings entirely.
I guess as far as being devil's advocate there, you could say that the billboards have created the space as it is today. You didn't have the billboards that again, you could laugh, but then when you think about Piccadilly, when you think about Piccadilly Circus, you think of the billboards. If they weren't there, would you think of it in the same sort of way?
And are they not a tribute? Are they not a tribute to our new sacred, which is commercial capitalism?
No, I appreciate that.
It's a good observation. I mean, you still got that. I'm guessing that's the theatre.
Oh,
there.
actually, no, I'll do that.
Still adds a
I'm coming back onto the screen. 1 second. There we are. This is what we're discussing at this point.
I guess that's why people say why Times Square is so popular, because of the billboards, because of the bright lights. I mean, yeah, it's an
Yeah, but does this sense of popularity, does it give like a sense of belonging? And if it gives a sense of belonging, does it give a sense of belonging that is as eternal, as God-given as the buildings without billboards would convey to the population who lives in it?
That's true. I don't know.
I think it's worth the pop though.
Right, we're back again. Here we are.
So this is, my bad. This is on the left we have Berlin. This is a corner of Berlin, graffitied up. Berlin had a very urban culture, very edgy, post-war and the East-West divide thing. On the right we have, guess where this is? This is Paris.
I was going to say Buckingham.
You can see this image is a bit difficult, but it's in the south. Sorry?
Is that the Défense?
Probably not, because there should be more.
The library is not, but.
Is this central Paris?
It's not southern. It's I was nearby.
Because central Paris, you only have one tower, literally, or one.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's
Exactly.
But that's
Well, this was built, I think, in the 70s or the 80s. It's got a name.
Because I find Paris is very good example, actually, of sort of what Scruton is talking about, which is really good architecture. Because nothing sort of points above the other building.
No, exactly.
Only
It's
sort of
level.
like big libraries of the opera, only those.
Yeah, the opera, the town hall, the church, and the cathedral. I mean, you still see the old the Haussmann architecture. It's 19th century on the side street, and then they just built this.
It's also
very strange.
I lived in Paris, and then I moved to London. And this was
very different.
The primary change I experienced is that here there are so many buildings sort of pointing out between everything. While in Paris everything was flat, and then you had La Défense, which was just outside of the center, the center, where all the big buildings were. So it was, and it really was a difference. It was a difference.
Yeah. What does all this mean? What do we take from this? We've already heard the distinction between the utilitarian, the purely pragmatic, and something more. When we contrast these two, for instance, utilitarian. This is from the promenade, the 2-mile-long promenade that goes out for a boulevard or whatever the proper name is, that goes out from Ceausescu's palace from Romania in Bucharest.
Wow.
It's the same block copy pasted. The Soviet architecture is really fascinating. But they come up with a design for a block, and it had everything you need. It had a bus stop, it had parking space, it had a tree, maybe two, and then they just duplicate it. They calculate everything that people need, and and then they just duplicate. In Bucharest, in Sofia, very similar. But it's a little bit more variation, but it's still got this kind of cold element to it. That this was planned in the strictest sense of this word. And then you contrast this with Venice. This field lived in the richest sense.
It's something organic.
You use it, but it's also it's more than this.
However, of course,
It won't be there in about 100 years.
No.
However, of course, something which does relate back in an interesting way, again to Scruton, but also to postmodernity, is that these originally utilitarian spaces of former Soviet nations, of the banlieue in Paris, in terms of the kind of outskirts of Paris, in terms of somewhere like the Barbican, a project of at least socialist, sort of modernist projects, whilst built utilitarian, are in their own weird way, in our generation, starting to cultivate a certain emotional attachment that never was supposed to be there when they were originally built. I know, and for those of us who love our traditional architecture, it seems strange, but there is a whole swathe of people who now see an emotional rather than practical attachment to these. But this only serves to reiterate a certain cultural significance, a certain demographic significance that does evoke a sense of place and a sense of belonging, and in some ways justifies the discussion we've been talking, even if it's not a religious one. It's still something irrational, it's still something emotional.
Well, even the strangest buildings are made to fit that sense of belonging. I mean, the Eiffel Tower is a great example of this. When that was first built, everyone hated it. Now you can't think of Paris without it. It's become home. So it's true that dynamic does exist. It's curious. There's some I mean, I was in Madrid a couple of weeks ago. There was this strange modern building, modern sculpture that had been built there, which I wasn't so fond about, but apparently everyone loves it. It's sort of become quite emblematic of Madrid, of the spirit of Madrid. A closing paragraph from Scruton. Although by definition intrinsic values cannot be translated into utilitarian values, this does not mean they have no utility. Ordinary aesthetic judgments concern what is right and wrong, what fits, what harmonises, what looks and sounds appropriate. Dressing right for a party, setting a table, decorating a room, and so on, all aimed at the right appearance, and the pleasure taken is inseparable from the judgment that things look as it should. There is an internal relation here between preference and judgment, and we become answerable to rational beings for our aesthetic choices, also for our planning, city planning. Through these choices, we are creating presences in the world of others. Presences in the world of others. I think this is the sense in which buildings have an eye, because they were authored by a subject who envisaged the world in a certain way and who designed a building to reflect it or to not reflect it, in a negative way, or with a lack of inspiration. What they think of the result is part of how it matters to both them and us. In designing our surroundings, we are bringing them within the sphere of accountability to others and theirs to us. And in that sense, we are providing the world with a face. We deface the world when we scribble me all over it and invite others to do the same. Beauty is the face of community, and ugliness the attack on that face by the solipsist and the scavenger.
Beautiful. Wow. And of course, community is about creating a safe space. It's about creating something, which has belonging, heritage. There are other thinkers, Jack, that also like to create safety in the state. They want to steer the ship of the state out of danger.
Yes.
Those two thinkers are Disraeli and Oakeshott, and we hope you will be joining us in 2 weeks' time.
1 week's time.
Well, 1 week's time, yes. Disraeli and Oakeshott.
Benjamin Disraeli
and Michael Oakeshott.
Interesting.
So we hope you'll be joining us for that. And in the meantime, have a wonderful week.
Yes.
Have a lovely rest of the evening.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us this time. And thank you to everyone online.
Yeah.